Imagine walking into your brother's wedding, a night filled with roses, champagne, and chandeliers, only to find your name erased from the seating chart. Not forgotten, but intentionally erased. What would you do? Would you swallow your shame, or would you stand up and fight to be seen? Tonight we explore a story that is cinematic, but not just dramatic, it's also a mirror. A story about family, loyalty, betrayal, and the price of silence. By the end of the film, you'll be asking yourself the same haunting question. What does family really mean? Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where are you watching tonight? I love seeing our stories connected across the world. And if you've ever been undervalued, if you've ever felt erased, you'll understand exactly why this story matters so much. So relax, because what happens in this ballroom will stay with you long after the music ends. As I entered the ballroom, I sensed something was wrong. The chandeliers cast a shimmering light, roses were wrapped around a large mirror, and a champagne tower stood like a waterfall. People clinked glasses, laughing, as if the night was all about fun. I held my gift bag in both hands, the ribbons digging into my skin, telling myself I was just nervous, even though this was my brother's wedding, where I should have been. In the middle of the entrance was a giant eucalyptus-framed mirror, its glass covered with a vinyl seating chart that curled like a blessing. Guests pressed in, tracing their names with their fingers, cheering when they found their table. When it was my turn, I moved forward, already imagining my place among the family tables. But there was none. Did I move too fast? I turned back slowly this time. Table 1, the groom's parents. Table 2, the bridal party. Table 3, college friends. Relatives I knew, even Uncle Larry, who hadn't come to Christmas in years. Row after row, everyone's name was there, except me. Next to the mirror was a list printed on pearl-colored paper, exported from Excel, arranged alphabetically. My last name appeared a dozen times, but not my first name. My chest tightened, my breath suddenly forgetting where to go. Do you need any help? The coordinator appeared, smiling professionally. I read my name, she tapped the iPad, frowned, and then returned softly. Maybe the waiting area? Sometimes we have extra seats. Extra seats, the two words fell like pins straight into my chest. Extra seats weren't family, they were for chaperones, for those who were unknown. I nodded instinctively. That's what girls like me were taught. Swallow the pain, pretend nothing happened. The waiting room was quieter. The TV on the wall showed a slideshow of smiling couples looking so happy. But my heart felt like it was on fire inside. An old lady in a navy uniform whispered, "Sometimes names get mixed up." I smiled gratefully, but my stomach clenched. I knew my family. An instinct pulled me back to the mirror. Waiting for the guests to leave, I leaned closer to the glass. The candlelight flickered on the surface, so smooth it seemed innocuous. Then I saw on the lower edge, where the eucalyptus leaf met the glass, a corner of vinyl was slightly exposed. Most people would have passed by. I didn't. I dug my fingernail into the edge, lifting it just enough. Under the clear plastic, the outline of letters was faintly visible, a blur of glue and dust. My name, not gone but peeled off by someone. A chill ran down my spine. All around me, the DJ introduced the bridesmaids, the guests applauded, the champagne clinked. But between my ribs was a solid void, a telling silence. The family didn't erase someone by mistake. They chose to erase them cruelly. Good, I heard myself whisper, either bitterly or with realization. This wasn't just about the chair. This was about belonging, about values, about bloodlines and boundaries. I touched the space where my name should have been, leaving a faint fingerprint. A boundary within me shifted. I stepped back, looking at the room as if I were really seeing it for the first time. Tonight, the chandeliers and the roses couldn't hide the truth. They'd written a story without me. And if they could take my name off the glass so easily, maybe it was time for me to stop playing the role they'd written. The night had just begun. When it was over, no one in this room would ever look at me the same way again, not even me. My name is Claire, I am 29 years old. If you ask my family, they will tell you that I am reliable, a fixer, someone who can patch up cracks before anyone else sees them. I have long considered that a compliment my family has given me. But fixer has a catch. The better you fix things, the more you disappear from the conversation. People forget that you are human, with limits, with scratches that no one can patch up. They're used to you appearing at the right time, leaving at the right place, being quiet, as if that were your nature rather than your effort. Daniel, my older brother, is 2 years older than me, reckless and loud. If he is the spotlight, I am the one behind the scenes, watching the switches. The day he forgot his lines at school, I whispered from the backstage. The day he dented Mom's car, I took the blame. When he almost lost his way in college, I sat all night in front of the dim screen, correcting each word in my essay like someone mending a torn net. He moved on while I stepped back. No one saw the needles I quietly sewed to make everything more perfect. I used to think that family was like that. One person shines, one person holds back. Then everyone will be recognized in their own way. But over time, the thank yous became less frequent, then disappeared completely. What I did became a matter of course. The family photos still had 4 people. It was just that I gradually slipped out of the center of the frame. I tried to build a compact life for myself, a decent apartment, a job that paid the bills, a few friends who knew how to listen. But as soon as the phone rang, I still went home, still rolled up my sleeves, still filled the empty space reflexively. I told myself it was because of love, because of loyalty, because of blood ties. That when it was my turn, they would be on my side. But I was wrong, not because they were blatantly malicious, but because my family's story was written with a different logic. Those who kept things running didn't need to be named. My name was in the maintenance column, not the honors page. That's why the moment in the ballroom mirror sobered me. When the vinyl peeled back and the outline of my name appeared beneath the glue, I understood. This wasn't an oversight, this was a choice. And the choice hadn't started tonight, it had just been bolded amid the chandelier and the champagne. I looked at myself not through the crystal lens on the table, but through the years. I saw a girl who was too good at making things okay. So good that no one asked if she was okay. I saw that every time I stood on the edge, I took a step back to fit in. I saw birthdays reduced to text messages, acknowledgments swallowed into silence, comforting words of "you'll see." Tonight, the glass answered for all of them. No more excuses of forgetting. No more hopes of mistake. Someone reached up and peeled it off. And the name wasn't just peeled off the glass, it was peeled off the story I thought I had a seat in. And as I stood there in the glittering ballroom, watching my brother laugh and joke with the bride, I realized something dangerous. If they could erase me so easily, maybe it was time for me to stop playing the role they had written for me. Maybe it was time for me to write my own. From the outside, my family looked perfect. If you flipped through our Christmas cards or glanced at the framed portraits in the hallway, you would see 4 smiling faces arranged in perfect symmetry. Dad with his hand on Mom's shoulder, Daniel in the middle grinning confidently, and me tucked off to the side, always leaning to create symmetry. To our neighbors and church friends, we were the kind of family that barbecued, volunteered for charity, and never exposed our private lives. But if you lived inside those walls, you knew the smiles faded when the cameras turned off. Dad was strong and quiet to the world, but behind closed doors, his silence was heavy, a wall that absorbed our voices without responding. Mom was the eternal hostess, pouring sweet tea and bragging about Daniel's scholarship. But when the house was empty, she sighed as if her chest were full of bricks. Daniel was the golden boy destined for more, and I was the glue that held all the broken pieces together. As time went on, the cracks became more apparent bit by bit. At family dinners, conversations revolved around Daniel's latest accomplishments, job interviews, promotions, engagement parties. When I tried to tell my life story, the words hung in the air like smoke, unnoticed until they dissipated. Birthdays turned into short text messages. My triumphs, my struggles, my quiet contributions never really entered the family narrative. Still, we polished the surface. At Thanksgiving, Mom set the china table, Dad carved the turkey, Daniel cheered loudly, and me, I refilled my glasses, cleared my plates, laughed at the lame jokes, because that's what kept the illusion alive. Families like ours weren't broken. We just hunkered down quietly. But the correction had its price. Over time, resentments built up in corners like dust that no one bothered to sweep up. I saw it most clearly in my mother. She loved Daniel's fiancé, the perfect hair, the picture-perfect smile, and yet I could still hear the edge in her voice when she thought no one was listening. She's young, she doesn't know how to keep a house. Or the way my father tensed when Daniel announced he was moving to the city, leaving them behind. The pride in their eyes dimmed with fear, with an unspoken question. Who will take care of us now, if not Claire? The irony. They needed me. Always did. But they never admitted it. Not to themselves, not to anyone. And so the cracks remained hidden, camouflaged by the chandeliers and champagne. So when I walked into the ballroom, that illusion was already fragile. I think part of me hoped the wedding would be different. That tonight, under the pink lights and the music, the facade and the truth would finally become one. That I would be more than a shadow, more than a sidekick. Instead, the missing name told the story clearly and coherently. They hadn't patched the cracks. They just covered them with glitter, hoping no one would notice. And that meant taking me out of the picture. The guests applauded as Daniel and the bride entered, their laughter echoing like background music. I applauded too, but my palms ached from the weight of secrets no one else seemed to hear. On the surface, it was joy. But inside, the cracks had widened into fractures, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole house collapsed. If anyone were to write the true history of our family, it wouldn't be about Daniel's promotions or Mom's proud speeches. It would be about the small, invisible sacrifices, mostly mine. I was 16 when the first big change happened. Dad's factory job was cut overnight. And suddenly the mortgage, the bills, the groceries, all became unanswerable questions. Daniel went off to college, sending home pictures of fraternity parties, while Mom cried at the kitchen table. So I went to work. After school, on weekends, whenever I could. I bagged groceries until my hands were chapped in the winter, tutored kids whose wages my parents paid me in crumpled bills. Every dollar I earned went straight into the family fund, which we pretended was savings, but was really just living expenses. When Daniel failed his sophomore year, the shame nearly destroyed Dad. He was ready to cut him off completely. I still remember that night, Dad screaming, Mom pleading, Daniel sitting silently, his face ashen. It was me who drove 6 hours to school, cleaned his dorm room while he stared at the floor, and drove him home. It was me who stayed up all night editing his essays when he decided to retake the test. Later, when he graduated summa cum laude, the whole family beamed in the photo. I stood by and applauded. No one asked who wrote half the essays. There was more, always more. When Mom's health declined, I moved back home, quitting my new job in the city. I cooked for her, scheduled her doctor's appointments, learned to take her blood pressure by instinct. When my dad was devastated after losing his job, I gave him envelopes of my savings so he could keep the truck to keep his dignity. When Daniel got engaged, I paid half the deposit for the rehearsal dinner because he was cash short this month. Each time, I told myself that it was only temporary, that love requires sacrifice, that family comes first. I told myself that someday everything would be okay, that when my time came, they would stand by me the way I had always stood by them. But life has a way of teaching us cruel lessons, because repeated sacrifices become obligations. When people get used to a light that is always on, they forget where the switch is. Even when the light flickers, they say, it must be the electricity. I came to understand that the family balance sheet was special, in that my name was on the expenses section, but not on the income section. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself it was worth it, that Daniel deserved a second chance, that Mom deserved comfort, that Dad deserved respect. But as the years passed, something inside me began to erode. Every time my name was left out of a greeting, every time a family photo pushed me out of the frame, every time my birthday passed with just a short text message, it became a little more etched. And I stayed still, smiling and giving back whenever my family needed me. That's why the name that was erased from the wedding invitation was cut so neatly. It wasn't just a mistake. It was the last page of the book I had written with my own sacrifice, a book that my family had decided to close without me. In that moment, standing there with my reflection hovering in the void where I should have been, I realized the truth I had been avoiding for years. I had always been an option. Convenient when needed, invisible when not. And there is nothing more painful than realizing that the people you have bled for have never really seen you. Daniel wasn't always a stranger to me. In fact, he was my world. When we were kids, he was the kind of big brother who could turn even a cracked sidewalk into an adventure. He taught me to ride a bike by holding on to the back of the seat and swearing he wouldn't let go, though of course he did, and I crashed into a bush. We laughed until we cried. On stormy nights, he'd sneak into my room, flashlight in hand, and make shadow puppets on the wall to drown out the thunder. I loved him. He was reckless, loud, charismatic, the kind of guy everyone had to pay attention to. Me, I was the quiet one, the safety net, the shadow that made sure his pranks didn't end in disaster. When he broke a neighbor's window, I told my mom it was me. When he forgot his science homework, I gave him mine. When he skipped class, I covered for him. Back then, it felt like loyalty, like love, but somewhere along the way, the balance shifted. College changed him first. He came back with swagger, with stories of parties and professors who admired him. I was proud even when I was secretly typing his papers at 2 a.m. But that pride turned sour the day he started looking at me differently, not as a teammate, but as someone less than me. At first, it was just little things. A teasing remark when friends were around. A thank you that never came after I saved his life again. Then the engagement came. His fiancée, perfect hair, perfect smile, looked at me like I was an outdated accessory, something she couldn't wait for him to change. And Daniel didn't correct her. He let the distance grow. But I still hold on to the memories, the laughter under the thick blankets, the whispered promises that we would always support each other. I thought those memories were something eternal, something untouchable. But tonight, staring at the empty space where my name should have been, I realized that memories cannot protect us from betrayal. Because Daniel had a choice. He could have made room for me at his table. He could have told his fiancée, his in-laws, our parents, she matters. She belongs here, but he didn't. He chose to be silent. And in families like ours, silence is more powerful than any words of praise. The deepest thing isn't just the deletion, it's knowing that deep down he knows what it means to me. He knows. He must know. We grew up in the same house under the same roof. He saw me sacrifice. He relied on me when he had no one else. And yet, when it came time to stand up for me, to return even a fraction of that loyalty, he turned his back. I think that's the cruelest thing about family love. Betrayal isn't always a big bang. Sometimes it's a quiet decision to let you go. And then looking at Daniel in his TUX, smiling as if his life was finally perfect, I couldn't help but ask myself a tough question. Did he really see me as his sister? Or was I just the scaffolding he was using until the house was finished? If the answer is the latter, then the missing name on the list wasn't a mistake. It was the truth spoken in silence and champagne. And I'm not sure what hurts me more, the brother I once had or the estranged brother I've become. If family was a theater, mine was a cast of actors who knew their parts all too well. And each role seemed to push me further away from the stage. Mom was the consummate hostess, always smiling at the neighbors, always bragging about Daniel's latest promotion or his fiancée's flawless skin. For her, appearances weren't just important, they were survival. She'd grown up poor, embarrassed by her old clothes, and she vowed her children would never feel the same. So she polished us like silver. Except some, like me, didn't shine as well. I was reliable, sure, but I wasn't a favorite child she could put on display. When Daniel brought his bride-to-be home, Mom took to her immediately. It wasn't just love, it was strategy. Together they were her picture perfect, successful son and elegant wife, and me, I became a haphazard shadow in the frame. Dad was different, less talkative. He didn't dismiss me with words, he dismissed me with silence. He had worked hard all his life, carrying the burden of expectations he could never fully meet. For him, Daniel was salvation, proof that his sacrifices had not been wasted. Sometimes I saw a flicker of pride in his eyes when I helped, when I stayed late at the hospital with Mom, when I gave him my savings so he could maintain his dignity. But those moments never lasted long. He would nod once, mumble a thank you, then look back at Daniel, as if acknowledging me too much would dilute the narrative he wanted the world to believe, that his son was the future of the family, not his daughter. And then there was Emily, Daniel's fiancée, completely polite, completely calm, completely vicious. She smiled at me as if I were an overstayer. She asked superficial questions, her eyes darting away before I could answer. Once, she joked at dinner, "Claire is almost like a second mother to Daniel. No wonder she doesn't have time for herself." Everyone laughed, everyone except me. Daniel didn't defend me. Mom didn't correct her. Dad just sipped his wine. That was the night I realized Emily wasn't just marrying Daniel, she was cementing my status as an outsider in the family. At the wedding, everything played out exactly as I'd memorized. Mom hovered over Emily, adjusting her veil, whispering compliments loud enough for the guests to hear. Dad shook hands, shoulders square, as if Daniel's suit reflected his own success. Emily swept through the room as if she owned it, every gesture carefully calculated, every gaze admiring her beauty. And what about me? I stood near the bar, glass of water in hand, pretending to be busy, pretending not to notice. It wasn't that they hated me, at least hatred acknowledged my presence. This was something colder, indifference, as if my existence were a necessary inconvenience, something to be dealt with quietly out of sight. Which is why the missing name on the seating chart made perfect sense. It wasn't a mistake, it was a logical continuation of how they'd treated me for years. Mom didn't need me in her perfect picture. Dad didn't see me as part of his legacy. And Emily, she'd rather rewrite the family story without me. The cruelest thing was that none of them had to say it. Their smiles, their silences, their casual omissions spoke volumes. And in the glittering ballroom, surrounded by flowers and music, I finally understood. This was not just about the wedding night. It was about every dinner where my words were ignored, every photo of me standing at the edge of the table, every laugh at me. Tonight was just the mask falling off, the truth finally revealed. They had always been ready to erase me. But tonight, they simply made it official. I had planned to make a clean retreat. A light coat, a vague greeting to the waiter, slipping through the glass door, letting the night wind lock behind me. No scene, no fanfare, just disappearing. That was how I used to deal with awkwardness, withdrawing myself, making the room comfortable. I walked along the edge of the room, blending in with the tall vases and drapes. Nearing the exit, the coordinator found me again, smiling politely. "Don't worry, we've prepared a very comfortable place in the waiting room. Less noisy, you'll be comfortable." Comfortable, the word was as slippery as a polished floor and slipped from meaning very quickly. I almost nodded. Then behind me, two voices passed like pencil marks on paper. I heard the layout had to be rearranged because of the groom's sister. A small laugh, polite to the point of coldness. Every family has a little tension. Tension. A clean way to call an expungement. I paused. Heat rose, not from humiliation, but from realization. I saw my escape route clearly laid out. The passenger seat, the waiting room, the side door. A perfect route to confirm what they needed. I could be moved without anyone having to change their words. I turned. From this vantage point, I saw the mirror in the entryway, reflecting the entire room, chandeliers, roses, champagne fountain, and the small space where my name had been a thin strip of vinyl. Right there, I saw an image caught between two worlds, the me of today and the me of many years ago who always chose smooth over right. I gave the dispatcher a polite smile. "Thank you, I'll stay here." She nodded, lost for a moment, then melted into the busy flow of work. The exit ahead was still open, inviting like a fire escape. But the way back was no longer at the door, the real way back was the disappearing habit. And tonight, it was blocked by a small decision to stay in sight. I took a step back behind the pillar, where the light was patchy, just enough to breathe. Here, I heard more, the waiter counting in his head before setting down a plate, the rustle of cloth as a customer adjusted his tie, the whispers drifting like smoke around the tables near the center. These were sounds I had always heard in the background. Tonight, they were the beat, and the beat was changing. Someone looked at me and then turned away, then another. The recognition spread slowly, like light filtering through a curtain. I was no longer the empty chair. I was the one who was not leaving. The shame was still there, but it was slowly replaced by another emotion. It began to crystallize into something else, with edges, with angles, will. I don't know where the night will take me, but I know that if I walk out the door now, I'll be gone forever from the ability to name myself. To stay means accepting the consequences, the innuendos, the blows, the half-spoken clinking of glasses. From this hidden corner, I inhale again. The chandelier ripples like water on the ceiling. The DJ changes the beat. A chain of events is about to follow, and when it happens, I'll be there to see it through. The way back is closed behind me, not with a bolt, but with an answer. I'll be here. I stood in the pale light behind the pillar. I tried to hold my trembling hands. The shame tried to hold me down like an invisible hand placed on top of my head. For a few beats, I almost nodded to it. Yes, maybe I should disappear. But then, instead of leaving this place, I chose to stay, but not in the passenger seat. I chose another position. My emotions also changed from that, from being too ashamed to confront. Now I was sober enough to reconsider the problem. I knew that this was not a mistake. It was someone who had exposed my name. And I also knew that silence was also a choice, and tonight I did not choose it. I lowered my shoulders, relaxed my jaw, let my breath hit the floor, and then returned. No need for a declaration of WAR. As long as I did not disappear from this place. The DJ changed the song. The chandelier shook slightly. The bridesmaids filed out, the sound of applause rolling across the floor like a cooling breeze through the room. I walked along the edge of the stage, to the table area, choosing an empty seat at the back of the room, far enough to see everything that was going on at the party today. I put down my purse, straightening my back. If they were waiting for me to retreat so that today's story would be perfect, they would have to wait a long time. Tonight, I would give them exactly what they hadn't counted on in the script. My presence, persistent until the end. And from now on, whatever happened, I would witness it from the inside. The table at the back of the room was as quiet as an island in a sea of noise. The tablecloth was neat, the cutlery so shiny that it faintly reflected my face, no longer the appearance of an invisible ghost, but of someone who had decided to stay. I lifted my glass of water, letting the drops on the cold rim fall onto my palm, pulling myself back to the present. From this angle, the ballroom reveals layers of rhythm. Mom gliding after Emily, adjusting her veil with soft determination. Dad leaning toward his old boss, smiling on point. Daniel moving between the beams of light as if he had practiced for a long time. The waiter counting silently before placing plates. The guests laughing louder with each clink of glasses. Everything operates admirably smoothly, except for the brief moments of discord that the eye hastily misses. Mom's smile flickers when she is left out mid-sentence. Dad's laughter misses a beat when he is interrupted. Daniel's momentary start when a question strays into the past. I am still alone. No one approaches. A cousin waves and drifts away like a life buoy without a line. I realize that I am invisible not because I am empty, but because the collective story needs that space to be beautiful. That space is a function. Understanding this, my chest tightens less. I no longer ask why me. In a self-accusatory way, I ask, what are they maintaining? And the answer lies right in the center, the perfect family photo, the straight lines of the ritual, the compliment that fills every crack. The music fades, the song slows, everyone pulls into a gentle sway. I sit still, hands clasped under the table, letting the drumbeat in my heart keep pace with the drumbeat of the orchestra. To the outside eye, I may look calm, but inside, my mind is counting the seconds. Not the seconds to run away, but the beats to meet what's next. Because in rooms like these, the break often comes in the form of a seemingly innocuous statement. It pops out of an unwitting microphone, placing a scratch on the plating. At that moment, the person sitting on the edge sees the crack run fastest. I wait for the statement, not with malicious eagerness, but with the calm of someone who knows what to do when it appears. The microphone squeaked enough to stop all conversation like a song with a pause button pressed. Uncle Robert stood up at the table near the center, his tie askew, his cheeks flushed with champagne. His glass was raised. "Congratulations to Daniel and Emily." Cheers broke out, traveling on the waves. I put down my glass, my back still on the back of the chair. Then the next sentence fell crisp as glass. "And a toast to real family, the ones who are always there and really matter." The sound didn't shatter, it shrank. The shards of laughter rolled a few times across the table and died at the edge of the napkin. I saw his eyes dart to me, just a beat sharp enough to CUT. No one needed to say names. The meaning was enough. My throat was dry, my back was straight. I heard a faint huff in my head, like the feeling of hitting the edge of a table without dropping a glass. I didn't move from my chair. I picked up my glass of water, took a sip small enough to keep my hand still. If they expected a wet crash, they would be disappointed. Humiliation, when it gets hot enough, doesn't melt, it explodes. The room returned to normal in 1, 2, 3 beats. The orchestra continued. The waiter continued to glide. To most people, it would be a joke that would pass like a sponge. But to me, it was a mark on the skin where a knife had been cut, and it would show on the skin, hard to hide. I let my eyes run around. Mom smiled awkwardly, mascara running from the corners of her mouth. Dad held his glass tighter than usual. Daniel shifted his weight on his feet, his smile a millimeter off. Emily tilted her head to whisper, her knuckles wider. Robert's words didn't explode the room, but they did shake off a few bits of glitter, and as the light shifted, one could see dust. Inside, a tiny voice said, "Now was not the time to boast, nor the time to respond with an argument. This was the time to keep my face flat so others could see the curvature of the room." I put down my cup, dabbing at the water with the edge of my towel. My heartbeat was steady. If they wanted a real family story without me, they had just accidentally placed the spotlight. I didn't need to step into the center, just stand still at the edge of the light. The rest, the room would do, like every room that had ever tried to put glitter on the cracks. And I knew that from this moment on, the chain of events would slide to where it had to go. An unexpected witness, some murmuring, then a word of recognition that would force everyone to raise their glasses in the right direction. I didn't need to push. I just needed to be there, the only thing they hadn't counted on when they peeled my name off the glass. After the words, "real family," the room closed like a hastily closed book. I was still sitting at the last table, my hands on the edge of the napkin, breathing evenly. When the waiter cleared the dishes, an older man in a well-tailored suit quietly pulled out a chair and sat next to me. A cool perfume, a polite smile, and a straight gaze. "You're Claire, right?" he asked, his voice steady as if he had considered it in advance. "I'm Martin. I used to work with your father. I know Daniel too. Haven't seen you all for a long time." I nodded, intending to say something polite, when he leaned over and lowered his voice. "Back in college, if you hadn't driven to pick me up, cleaned up, and edited every essay, Daniel would have failed." Your father said it proudly, even in a low voice. I thought someone would mention it tonight, but it seems he's forgotten. The last 2 words were placed on the table, as light as a spoon, as heavy as evidence. I heard the sound of forks hitting plates at the next table, the rustle of napkins, but the sound inside me shut down. He knew, not a rumor, a detail only family members would know. I smiled as politeness demanded. "Old news. OLD doesn't mean untrue," Martin replied, nodding as if signing a document. "Families forget what keeps them grounded. Outsiders sometimes remember better." He touched the back of his chair, excused himself, and returned to the table. When he left, the air around me grew half a degree hotter. Not with shame, with anger. Not the kind of anger that flared, but anger that knew its way. They knew. They weren't naive, they chose silence. My name peeled from the glass was a trick. The years peeled from the story were the intention. I looked toward the main table. Daniel was smiling, but his lips paled under the light. Mother adjusted the center of the table, her hands shaking slightly. Father leaned toward his old boss, his forehead lined. Emily put her hand on Daniel's arm, her nails digging in gently in an orderly manner. No one looked at me. They were busy saving face. A strange thought flashed through my mind. Perhaps the erasure wasn't just cruel, it was protective. My presence, if called by name, would open up another balance sheet they didn't want to open. In their story, I was safest when I was in the background. I put my hand on the tablecloth. My pulse was steady. The chandelier throbbed. A piece of truth had slipped through the glitter, dry and sharp, like a slip of paper tucked under a door. They knew, but they didn't tell. And in rooms like this, a whisper wouldn't stay quiet, it would be passed around. The truth didn't need a microphone. It traveled down the hallway, along the edge of tables, through sleeves and eyes. First Martin table, then a nod in my direction. Then the woman across from me raised her eyes in surprise. By dessert, the whispering had shifted gears from discreet to direct. I heard the groom's sister saved his life in college. One asked, low enough for the table to hear. Then why wasn't it in the speech? Another replied loud enough for the two tables to mingle. And why isn't she sitting with the family? I sat still, eyes on the untouched cake, ears open. From the corner, I saw Daniel smile more than usual, a sign of a person on the receiving end. Emily tilted her head and whispered, her smile unwavering but her fingers clenched. Mom upped the ante, her voice high and bright like sprinkles of sugar. Dad was silent. His silence grew louder with each unanswered question. A colleague of my father's came to my desk, resting his hand on the back of his chair like someone standing in front of an old house. Claire, your father didn't know how to say it that day, but everyone understood. You did a LOT. Tonight. He paused, his eyes darting toward the center. There should have been a clear statement. I let out a breath after he left. For the first time that night, I felt less invisible. The gaze directed at me now was no longer cheaply scrutinizing. It carried recognition and a shred of doubt about the official story. And it was that doubt that made the room skew. I glanced at Daniel. The yellow light highlighted the pale skin around his mouth. He shifted his feet, his eyes darting, as if searching for an exit in a familiar diagram. There was no exit in the glass. The cracks were connecting into lines. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The room had begun to speak for me. My name, once peeled off the glass, was now in every why question. Why not mention it? Why not at the same table? Why, if it was true? The music grew heavier, the metal on ceramic noises quieter. In the center, the lights were still on, but the light now pointed to dusty spots. And when it pointed to the right spot, people were forced to blink. The rhythm of the ballroom changed when a guest, whom I vaguely remembered as a colleague of my father's, slapped Daniel on the back and said loudly enough for 3 tables to hear, I heard a good thing tonight. Your sister saved you a goal in college, didn't she? They should raise a glass to that. The question bounced like a stone on flat water. The waves chased each other, hitting the tables. Daniel laughed quickly, too quickly. Family matters are often exaggerated. He glanced at me. G didn't give a signal. The room waited for a better answer. A groomsman, his champagne more effusive, shouted from a nearby table. Hey Danny, that speech, why didn't you mention Claire? We thought you were supposed to. Laughter flared and died like a lighter running out of fuel. Daniel paused, his shoulders hunched slightly. The light suddenly revealed every angle of his cheekbones. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then settled on a safe one. It's not just Claire. Everyone contributed in their own way. Tonight we celebrate the collective, the family. His voice tried to be even, but the word collective clinked together like empty glasses. The silence that followed wasn't a pleasant one. It was like the space after a misdirected answer. People glanced at each other, then at me, as if the question had been passed to me without my having touched the ball. I didn't stand up. I leaned back in my chair, palms down on the towel. My presence thinned the collective response. Not because of what I said, but because I was in the frame. Emily leaned close to Daniel's ear, her whisper tight. Mom hurried toward them, her smile raised like a shield. Dad sat up straighter, his hands gripping the stem of his glass. The chandelier swayed slightly, sending streaks of light swaying like waves against the glass. The room seemed to realize what I had known all along. Silence is a strategy, but it has an expiration date. When enough people have mentioned the truth, silence becomes avoidance. And avoidance under the lights looks like a sin. Daniel inhaled as if he were about to say more, but the orchestra changed the tune. The DJ stepped on the microphone, saving him with a new waltz. He took Emily's hand, slid onto the floor, trying to regain his rhythm. I watched. His movements were still beautiful, still on beat, but off. Not because of his steps, but because the room no longer believed in the old show. I put my hand on my wallet, not to leave, but to hold myself in place. The chain of events had reached its climax. The rest would not require my pushing. A word of recognition would come, from whom I don't know, but from someone who couldn't be stifled with a smile. And when it came, I wouldn't bow. The microphone hissed softly like a scratch on glass. The ballroom sagged in a breath. At the head table, Mr. Harrison, silver-haired and well-tailored, stood. His wife reached out to stop him, and he brushed it away with a gentle gesture. The champagne glass was raised. I've known this family for years. His voice was deep and clear, effortlessly cutting through the chatter. I've seen Daniel grow from a promising young man to the confident man standing next to his bride tonight. Daniel straightened his shoulders. Emily's smile remained bright. Mom's hand paused on a corner of her veil. Dad looked down at his glass, the side of his face frozen. Harrison paused, then continued. But I've also seen the silent sacrifices that made the journey possible. The long nights, the car rides, the dissertations that were revised word for word. His gaze moved across the room, stopping where I sat at the edge of the light. I remember hearing about a girl named who drove miles, cleaned, corrected, kept the door to the future from slamming. The silence was no longer empty. It had a shape, a weight. The orchestra stopped as if unconsciously. A few forks dropped absently onto plates. Tonight, when we raise our glasses to Daniel and Emily, Harrison said slowly, don't forget the sister who made this day possible. Thank you, Claire. The ballroom stood between two worlds for a split second. Then, like points of light connecting on the ceiling, glasses were raised one by one. Harrison's table first, then the table next to it, then another cluster farther away. The clink of crystal echoed thinly and clearly through the roses, the tower of champagne, Daniel's crooked smile. To Claire, the voices joined. My back was straight, but my hands were shaking. I didn't have time to touch the glass. My throat tightened, not with humiliation as before, but with a feeling that was close to lightness. It had been a long time since this room had called me by my name. Daniel raised his glass, his movements half a beat too late. Something in his eyes flashed indescribably, a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and a shred of resentment that couldn't be pushed away. Mom clapped, the sound not reaching her eyes. Emily leaned into Daniel's ear, her whisper turning her knuckles white. Dad didn't raise his glass. He rested his hand on the table as if clinging to something old, unwilling to let go. The toast ended. The conversation started up again, but the air had changed color. The stories hidden under the glitter now stood in the light. No one could say don't know anymore. I exhaled slowly, placing my hands on my thighs to stop them from shaking. I didn't consider it vindication, not yet, but it was a milestone. A pen mark signed my name back on the edge of the page, and once a name is called in the chandelier, it is hard to peel it off again. From my seat, I looked at the room as if it were a large, quivering glass surface. The scratches had already appeared, no rose thick enough to cover them. I knew the rest of the night would continue dancing, taking pictures, cutting the cake, but the overall story had gone awry. And when a story goes awry, one must find a way to stand firm. I didn't need to do anything more. I just needed to hold this state in my heart like a flame between two hands, a silent recognition, warm enough to light the way for the next step. The sounds in the ballroom returned, but not uniformly. The laughter was higher than usual, the jokes were more intense, the clinking of glasses was too much. My name, once peeled from the glass, now lay in the air like glittering dust, visible to everyone but untouchable. I slowly stood up. The chair scraped lightly against the polished floor. A few heads turned, curious, not aggressive. I smoothed my skirt, picked up my purse, took a breath. No one stopped me. No one invited me to sit down. Everything was as it should be. Each step toward the door was lighter than the last, as if the accumulated weight of years were peeling off my shoulders layer upon layer. The chandelier cast fragments of light, chasing each other across the tile, the scent of roses fading behind. I passed the entry mirror, where the vinyl had been parted, and paused for a beat. In the glass, the girl before me was no longer a silhouette. She looked straight back. I opened the door. The night air rushed in cool and sharp. The music was muffled by the thick door and the street opened out before me, long and empty like an unwritten line. I didn't know if Daniel would call tomorrow, if Mom would say what she should, if Dad would ever raise a late glass. They might not. But tonight their answers no longer define me. I walked down the steps. My heels clicked rhythmically. I thought of a sentence that had just formed in my head, as clear and concise as an inscription. Family is not someone who can erase you from a photograph. Family is someone who remembers you when you are out of the frame. I walked on, not looking back. I took nothing from that room except the one thing that cannot be peeled off my skin, my own name. They tried to erase me. I am still here. The sounds in the ballroom returned, but not uniformly. The laughter was higher than usual, the jokes were more intense, the clinking of glasses was too much. Claire walked out, not in defeat, but with the gait of someone who has just unlocked the latch on the inside door. She didn't take the rejected chair with her, nor did she ask for an apology. She took something more durable, her own worth put back in its place by a small decision and a big enough acknowledgement. And here's the question for you. Is family defined by blood or by those who refuse to erase you from the story when it's best to stay silent? If you've ever been pushed to the edge, seen your name peeled off the shared glass, what did you choose at the door, to disappear or to stay and be seen clearly enough? Tell me in the comments the moment you straightened your back, even for a beat. Your story could be a mirror for someone in need. And if you want to continue journeys like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Not all family stories are for entertainment. Sometimes they are MAP that leads us back to ourselves. My name, once peeled from the glass, now lay in the air like glittering dust, visible to everyone but untouchable. I slowly stood up. The chair scraped lightly against the polished floor. A few heads turned, curious, not aggressive. I smoothed my skirt, picked up my purse, took a breath. No one stopped me. No one invited me to sit down. Everything was as it should be. Each step toward the door was lighter than the last, as if the accumulated weight of years were peeling off my shoulders layer upon layer. The chandelier cast fragments of light, chasing each other across the tile, the scent of roses fading behind. I passed the entry mirror where the vinyl had been parted and paused for a beat. In the glass, the girl before me was no longer a silhouette. She looked straight back. I opened the door. The night air rushed in cool and sharp. The music was muffled by the thick door, and the street opened out before me, long and empty, like an unwritten line. I didn't know if Daniel would call tomorrow, if Mom would say what she should, if Dad would ever raise a late glass. They might not. But tonight, their answers no longer defined me. I walked down the steps. My heels clicked rhythmically. I thought of a sentence that had just formed in my head, as clear and concise as an inscription. Family is not someone who can erase you from a photograph. Family is someone who remembers you when you are out of the frame. I walked on, not looking back. I took nothing from that room except the one thing that cannot be peeled off my skin, my own name. They tried to erase me. I am still here.